President, over the next 45 minutes or so, finance Democrats will come to the floor and we will be discussing the second anniversary of the Trump tax bill. And as the ranking Democrat, I'm going to begin it, and I know my colleagues will be joining me. Mr. President, the Trump tax law is now 2 years old, and for millions of middle-class Americans, it is not a very happy anniversary. My own view is the economic legacy of the Trump administration will be that they spent $1.5 trillion to widen the economic gap in America. And if I were to sum up what the law was all about, the Trump tax law, it was about making wealthy people wealthier and the middle class being an afterthought. And I'm going to walk through some of the reasons why I've reached that judgment, and then I know my colleagues will be getting into some of these issues as well. Now, Donald Trump and Republicans in the Congress promised they'd write a bill that was focused on helping workers and the middle class. The president told me personally that he thought that he and people like him should not get a tax break. He said that to me personally. But that simply wasn't the case. Now, we were told that the Trump tax legislation would pay for itself. That was wrong by a couple of $1 trillion. We were told that it would kick off a towering wave of job-creating investments in so many hard-hit American communities. That's not been the case. We were told that workers would get, on average, a $4,000 raise. Wrong once more. Wrong on all counts with respect to the promises made to the American people. Now, what in fact did happen is rates were slashed for folks at the top and multinational corporations. The corporations then turned around and shoveled that money back to the shareholders, who by and large are wealthy themselves, and so you saw a historic boom in stock buybacks. Now the sugar high has worn off. And Mr. President, I've been going home for town meetings, open to all. I'm going to be in a county this weekend that President Trump won, listening to people. Don't give any speeches, just listening to people. And what I hear at these meetings in counties in Oregon that Donald Trump won is that folks see very little evidence that their lives have changed, that somehow this tax bill ended up trickling down to them. My sense is it's amazing that a bill can cost so much, you can borrow so much, and fail the middle class so thoroughly. Now, there are two issues that it's important to focus on going forward. We're going to talk about that. There's a lot of talk about how congressional Republicans and the Trump administration are talking about another scam tax proposal, basically going to the same playbook that made the middle class an afterthought 2 years ago. I think that it's important that people understand that all the evidence indicates that the second bill isn't going to focus on the middle class either. According to the reports in the press that have been discussing this new Republican proposal, which is in effect an admission that the first proposal failed the middle class while helping the most fortunate, what we hear about this new proposal is that Republicans are considering what would amount to yet another massive handout for folks at the top of the economic pyramid. One Trump advisor is reportedly discussing a proposal that would effectively wipe out the taxation of capital gains, and we all know that a fraction, a tiny fraction of the American people get most of those capital gains, and they happen to be the most fortunate. The U.S. tax code is already a tale of two systems. We've got one for cops and teachers. Their taxes are taken out of every single paycheck. And we've got another for high flyers who can make most of their money, for example, off investments, and to a great extent because of the laws that allow them to defer paying their taxes. Those high flyers can pay what they want when they want to. I don't know of any cops or teachers in North Dakota or Oregon that have that. Their taxes are taken out of every paycheck, once or twice a month. Their system is mandatory. But if you're a high flyer and you make most of your money off investments, your taxes aren't mandatory. And if you use the doctrine of tax deferral, you can just defer and defer and defer. And after you pass, you can hand everything off to your kids, Johnny and Mary. They get the stepped up, basis, and then they get to do the same thing. So you got to have one set of rules, Mr. President, that apply to everybody. That's what we on our side of the aisle have been working for. We think you ought to have one set of tax rules that apply to everybody. And by the way, you give everybody in America the chance to be successful. That's what Bill Bradley, somebody I look to for advice, he's a member of the Finance Committee, another tall Democrat with a lot better jump shot than me. But he and Ronald Reagan got together and they produced a proposal that gave everybody in America a chance to get ahead. But that's not what this new Trump tax discussion is all about, this new proposal. We're not talking about the top paying a fair share. I just mentioned what it could mean for folks at the very top, wealthy people whose income is based on capital gains could be off the hook completely. Completely. The first Trump tax law took what's already broken about our tax system, the embedded unfairness to the middle class, and made the problem even worse. You aren't going to fix it by doubling down on the same failed policies. The second issue that the Trump folks are going to be focusing on, apparently, going forward, is the handouts to billionaires and corporations. That's the big accomplishment to date, but it's inseparable from a Trump agenda that's all about helping those at the top at the expense of everyone else. Donald Trump has sought to kick more than 20 million Americans off their health care since day one. He's tried to gut Medicaid, which is a lifeline for so many seniors who depend on long-term care in nursing homes, and is the centerpiece of our fight against opioid addiction. The President proposed slashing education funding for students and teachers, slashing housing funds at a time when millions of Americans are struggling to afford rent or to cover the mortgage. I can go on. Home heating assistance, Meals on Wheels. Same pattern again and again. Tax handouts for the most fortunate, the multinational corporations, billionaires. The one that we were told would pay for itself sent the deficit into the stratosphere. And then working people and the middle class, in addition to being an afterthought in terms of benefits, are expected to endure the pain of the Trump budget cuts. Now, middle-class folks know they got a raw deal in the Trump tax law in 2017. That's why it's been so unpopular. I was struck in the campaign of 2018, Republicans who thought that they had done something that would be so valuable to the American people. They couldn't even go out and talk about it with middle-class folks, because middle-class folks would say, we didn't really see much of anything, might have gotten a little bit, take the family to dinner, but we don't remember getting much of anything. So on the anniversary of the Trump tax law, the people who are celebrating are the high flyers, the corporate executives who are tallying up the stock buyback benefits, the handouts they got. But if you work for a living, you really say, this sure looks like a con job. And in the months and years ahead, my Democratic colleagues and I on the Finance Committee and in our caucus are going to be working with anybody who's interested in fixing our broken tax system for good. Mr. President, we've shown that's our interest. Personally, I wrote the only two comprehensive bipartisan proposals to reform our taxes since Bill Bradley and Ronald Reagan got together, first with Judd Gregg, then the chairman of the Budget Committee, and most recently with our colleague, who is Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates. So I and others, and I see Tom Carper, a valued member of the Finance Committee from Delaware here, we are committed to working with our colleagues in a bipartisan way to have a tax system that gives everybody a chance to get ahead. That's not what we got 2 years ago. But we want it understood that we're going to continue, and I say it personally as ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, we are going to continue to reach out a hand of welcome to Republicans who want to work for something different than what passed 2 years ago, and a tax code that would create one set of rules in America built on fairness that applies to all Americans. With that,